WorldDenver talks today with Gary Doer, Canadian ambassador to the U.S. since 2009, and for the 10 years prior to that, Premier of the state of Manitoba. He began his career as an elected official in the Manitoba Legislative Assembly in 1986, and according to Canada Online, as Premier of Manitoba, Gary Doer combined the traditional National Democratic Party emphasis on social programs with a middle-of-the-road economic policy of balanced budgets and paying down debt. And you are considered a moderate socialist. Is that still true of you?
Well, the NDP is a social democratic party, but I eliminated small business tax and I invested in healthcare and education.
And then when you turned to being an ambassador, you were working in some of the same things, trade and energy security and border security. Is that correct?
Well, we deal with a lot. We've been friends and allies since the War of 1812, and we both have fun talking about who won that war. But after that, we worked together on trying to keep our neighborhood safe, working in international areas. As ambassador, I'd been dealing with the situation as allies in Afghanistan. We worked together with some of the military and air force people from Colorado Springs in Libya, and of course we're working together today on how we can get into successful negotiations with preventing a nuclear weapon from being obtained by the Iranian regime. And of course we're concerned and working together with the U.S. as Canadians and Europeans on the situation with Crimea and on the Ukrainian-Russian border.
Talk more about that, if you will. What are you working on right now that can help to resolve that situation?
Well, we're trying to put as much pressure and leverage on the Putin regime as possible, and we're trying to be coordinated between the European countries, Canada and the United States, and NATO countries, for example, have to work together. When you say work together, there's always different agreements on that, and mostly agreements, but sometimes disagreements on the sanctions and the pace of sanctions. But obviously we're all very worried about the invasion of Crimea and what may flow from that in the future.
And President Obama has announced further sanctions just recently as
Yes.
we talk. Do you think sanctions are going to do the trick?
Well, if we look at the economic sanctions that the world brought against Iran, it hasn't done the trick yet because we haven't got an agreement to forego completely and forever the obtaining a nuclear weapon in Iran, but it has brought them to the table. So we'll find out, to answer that question about the trick, whether that works or not. On Russia, sanctions are obviously doing nothing is not an option the American and Canadian people would prefer. Putting a lot of boots on the ground is not a preferred option. And economic sanctions do bite, and they do have leverage. We'll see whether they work and where it goes from there.
One thing that is quite in the news is the Keystone XL pipeline, the phase 4, I think, of the pipeline. What was your reaction when the Obama administration, decided not long ago to extend indefinitely the review period, the comment period on the pipeline?
Well, we would have preferred decisions. The company that is proposing the pipeline and proposing the pipeline and proposing an alternative route in the pipeline would prefer a decision. We obviously will continue to be good energy trading partners, but the public should know that oil is coming down from Canada since the first delay in Nebraska. It's just coming down on trucks from the Bakken oil field, 500 a day in North Dakota, Montana, Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and on rail. And it's not as if the oil is not being harvested and sent to the refineries on the Gulf Coast. And if you read the State Department report written by scientists, it clearly states that rail has higher greenhouse gas emissions. So in other words, we have a more negative environmental consequence. It has higher risk for life and limb than a pipeline, and it has higher cost. So we have trucks and rail taking the oil from Canada and North Dakota and Montana to market. And since the delay, we've got proposals in Canada to build pipelines, 2 of them proposals to the West Coast and 2 of them to the East Coast. So if you look 5 years out, what is the consequence of delay? You're going to find, it's higher emissions, higher risk, and higher cost on rail, and different options being developed by Canada rather than just putting all our energy eggs in the American basket.
One of the concerns of environmentalists is what it might do to the Ogallala aquifer, which is...
We all have aquifers, huge aquifers.
Yes.
And we all have pipes going through them, including the aquifer that you mentioned.
So you're not concerned that
No, everybody should be concerned. And the Nebraska Water Commission and the Nebraska government was opposed to the pipeline going through the Sandhill portion of the aquifer.
because of the cranes?
It's been amended. So that pipeline has been amended, and the State Department signed off on the amended route with the state of Nebraska because they had a joint route change, a modest one, but it achieved the objective of going around the Sandhill portion. People opposed to it, senators from the Democrats and Republican side that were opposed to it 4 years ago, the route, not the oil, signed onto it, and so did the governor, who opposed the route through the Sandhill portion of the aquifer.
There are environmentalists who have also accused you of turning your back on problems of global warming and climate change because of the way that you have backed the Keystone pipeline completion. What do you say to that? Are you still someone who believes in global warming?
Yes, I do. And the first action I was involved in with our government and the U.S. government was to take all these disparate rules and regulations on light vehicle emission standards and have a higher energy efficiency light vehicle standard in both Canada and the United States. Why? The highest creator of greenhouse gases in both our countries are the cars we drive. And the second part of transportation that's a challenge is the fleet of trucks, the 9 million trucks in Canada and the United States. So we have brought in much higher standards. The president doesn't get any credit for that from the environmental movement. The prime minister doesn't get any credit because there's no conflict, and you're not going to cover it, and I'm not going to have to answer questions on it. So we brought it in together. We've worked on black carbon. Canada is now at 63% electrical generation from renewable energy. So we're not going to try to be holier than thou to some of our critics, but we're not standing still when it comes to cleaner air and cleaner water. The pipeline, again, history will not be kind to the environmental industry who have blocked the pipeline on the theory that the oil would stay in the ground. 3 or 4 years later, if you were to ask them, were they correct about that? They may not admit it, but the oil is coming down from Canada, from Montana, from North Dakota, and it's on rail. Now, the State Department says it's 28 to 42% higher greenhouse gas emissions, i.e. negative to the climate change, on rail over pipelines. So I feel just because they've said, and they're raising money on what has turned out to be not correct, doesn't mean that I'm forsaking what I believe to be the most important part of climate change. That's energy efficiency. It's better to have higher energy efficiency standards for vehicles, for trucks, and for the way in which oil moves. Some people argue we should have no oil and drive no cars. That's fine. I still drive a car. It's 4 cylinders, full declaration, and I'm not going to, get in a kayak and go back to Washington. So I'll be on an airplane.